Starting today, this is the house for me and Bob, she announced. Her words, spoken so boldly and out of the blue, left me utterly speechless. This house was something my husband and I had meticulously planned and built over the years. We were finally looking forward to a tranquil and peaceful retirement life in this quiet piece of land. What on earth are you talking about? I asked in disbelief. Well, haven't we been living together all this while? As your son's wife, it's only natural that I live here. She spoke, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Yes, we had indeed been living together, but the countless troubles she had caused over the years were immeasurable. I had been planning to cut ties with her as we moved to this new place. So, where's my room? She cheerfully asked, prancing around a certain room like an overexcited child. I'll be taking the largest room. Old folks like you don't really need such a big space, do you? She added. Taken aback, I replied without thinking. What? You don't have a room here? What? She exclaimed, her eyes wide in surprise. It appeared she genuinely believed she would be living in this new house. Well, if you really want to live here that much, I responded. My words seemed to have struck a nerve as she turned beet red and angrily confronted me. Even after showing her a suitable living space, she seemed unsatisfied. I had made up my mind I was going to get back at this self-centered, greedy daughter-in-law of mine. My name is Catherine Sanders. Until recently, I was working as a caregiver. After retiring in my 60s, my husband, who also retired around the same time, and I have been enjoying our peaceful days together. It was in my late 20s when I married my husband and gave birth to our son. Despite our busy lives, we worked together to manage household chores and child-rearing, which was quite enjoyable. Perhaps because of the ample love we showered on him, our son grew up to be a kind and considerate young man, just like his father. After getting into a prestigious university, our son landed a job in a major corporation and has been doing well. Now in his 50s, he remains as caring and thoughtful as ever. He always cares for us, and we all support each other without intruding too much into each other's lives. It was when our son was in his 40s that he brought home the woman he wanted to marry. The woman came across as friendly and seemed like a confident person who wouldn't shy away from meeting new people. My husband and I had an enjoyable conversation with her and thought we could rest easy with such a responsible daughter-in-law. However, we realized that this was just a facade after she married our son. Our daughter-in-law turned out to be very self-centered and selfish. After marriage, they started living with us, and her behavior became increasingly problematic. Furthermore, she was constantly demanding something from us, which was exhausting for both my husband and me. Hey Mrs. Sanders, can you lend me some money? We don't have enough disposable income because Bob's earnings are low. Our daughter-in-law, who had been so amiable at our initial meeting, began to make outrageous demands as soon as she married our son. I regretted giving them permission to marry. If I had known she was like this, I would have definitely said, you should reconsider. Listen here, Linda. Most people don't squeeze their in-laws for money. You should resolve your issues between you and your husband. When I replied calmly, my son's wife, Linda, began to yell as she usually does. Don't you care that I'm in trouble? This is why I can't stand old-fashioned people like you. Aren't you getting enough money for living? You're being supported by my son's earnings, so if you want to spend money freely, why don't you get a job? Enough. I don't want to hear your nitpicking anymore. Linda continued to insist on borrowing money, despite knowing she always loses to my sound arguments. Living under the same roof and dealing with her rude behavior every day is utterly exhausting. Linda is a stay-at-home wife, but does not lift a finger around the house. Despite Bob working hard and bringing in the income, all she ever does is complain about the house being too dirty and unbearable. Though she's Bob's wife, I'd reached the end of my rope with her. Since Linda moved in with us, our lives have been continuously disrupted. Even though she has a husband, she takes it for granted that she can play around until the early hours of the morning. She would be on the phone loudly, even late at night, or would act self-centered towards me while I'm preparing meals, like saying, I want to eat meat today. I doubt even a teenager would act so arrogantly. My husband and I felt it was ridiculous to cater to Linda, who is, after all, an outsider to us, and there were times when we would just leave the room without engaging with her. We saw no need to bend over backwards for such a disrespectful person. However, Linda seemed displeased with our attitude, and there were instances where she would throw tantrums in anger. She has a troublesome nature, acting out and causing havoc when things don't go her way. It seemed that even Bob was worn out dealing with such a wife. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. If I'd known she was like this, we wouldn't have moved in together. One evening, in Linda's absence, as she was out enjoying another night of partying, Bob apologized to us. Bob felt incredibly guilty for causing trouble to us due to the cohabitation, more than his own hardship. His kind-hearted nature probably prevents him from kicking her out, despite everything. Bob's considerate nature is a virtue, but he doesn't need to be so involved with someone who hurts him and treats him unfairly. We understand you're the one who's having the hardest time, Bob. But you're the one who needs to decide how to deal with Linda from here on out, my husband said, with a mix of kindness and sternness. Bob nodded in response. Don't worry, I've got it under consideration. With that little push from my husband, it seemed like he had made up his mind about something. Unaware that she was being treated as a problem in this house, Linda was out partying again that night. Is it true you guys are building a new house? She asked us out of the blue one day. We're currently living in a house that's about 70 years old. My husband and I had been planning for years to use our savings to build a new house when we retire. When we first met, I mentioned it, but it seemed like Linda didn't really listen, as she reacted as if hearing it for the first time. In reality, the construction is nearly complete, and we're even packing for the move, but we felt no obligation to tell Linda. Yeah, so what? I responded curtly. Upon hearing my reply, Linda began to pound on the table in protest. Why are you building a house for yourselves when you won't be around for much longer? You should build a house for Bob and me. We might even have a child in the future, and we don't have our own house yet. Isn't it only fair that you provide at least the down payment? Her demands were unbelievable. It's true that sometimes parents provide the down payment when their child buys a house. But I hadn't heard anything about Bob and Linda planning to buy a house. And both Bob and Linda are already in their 50s. I had heard they had no intention of having children and they were both okay with it, so I was surprised to hear her use that as a bargaining chip. You said you weren't planning on having kids. And whether or not you have children, you and Bob are fundamentally the ones who should bear the cost of building a house. Do you think all parents should provide the down payment? At my words, Linda's face turned beet red. It seems that Linda is angry because she was told the truth. It's so unfair that you get to live in a new house while we don't. After throwing out that inexplicable parting shot, Linda stormed upstairs. I'm the one who's furious, being asked for money when they have no plans to buy a house. All Linda wants is to find a way to extract money from us. I'm sure she doesn't have the slightest intention to use the money she gained for her life with Bob. Both my husband and I had grown weary of dealing with selfish Linda. We decided that, once we moved to our new home, we'd finally sever all ties with her. A few weeks later, our new house was completed and we, along with my husband, started to prepare for our new life by sending over our belongings. Because we were already physically drained, we had the movers and Bob assist us and steadily progress was made. We had finally managed to get the home we had dreamed of living in for years, just for my husband and I. The realization that we had achieved this in our golden years filled us with a deep sense of satisfaction. However, our tranquility was shattered when an unexpected visitor appeared. It was Linda. Congrats on your new home, she said. We were surprised to see her there. Even Bob was taken aback. We hadn't told Linda about our new location, nor about our moving plans. We assumed she must have followed us here when we left home, her actions leaving us with an unsettling feeling. Moreover, Linda had brought a large suitcase and a duffel bag with her, apparently lugging all of it all the way here. We soon understood why. Starting today, this is mine and Bob's house too, she exclaimed. I was shocked by Linda's audacious statement. This was the home my husband and I had planned and built for years, where we intended to spend our twilight years in peace. But it seemed like Linda was planning on living here. What are you talking about? I asked. Well, we've been living together up until now, right? So, it's only natural for me, as your son's wife, to live here too, right? Linda said it as if it's the most natural thing in the world. Why, after all the trouble she's caused us over the years, did she think she could just impose on us like this? The annoyances Linda has caused are too many to count, and we were planning to cut ties with her during this move. So, where's my room? As she rudely barged into our new house and wandered around, both my husband and I found our expressions becoming more stern. Upon arriving in one of the rooms, Linda exclaimed excitedly like a child, "I want this biggest room! Old folks like you don't need this much space." To this, I responded reflexively, "Huh? You don't have a room here? Huh?" Linda was taken aback. She seemed to genuinely believe she could move into our newly built house. Her arrogance made me infuriated. "Well, if you want to live here so badly, how about this spot?" I pointed to the storage space under the stairs. It was full of vacuum cleaners and various household supplies, but it had just enough space for one person. Linda blinked her eyes wide open and laughed off the suggestion as a joke. "Stop kidding around. There's no way I could live there." "Oh, you don't like it? Then come with me." I took Linda outside and pointed to the shed at the corner of the yard. "I think that would be a perfect fit for you. In fact, it's more than you deserve." At my words, Linda's face turned beet red and she charged at me. "You've got to be joking. There's no way I could live there. Enough is enough." The one who cut off Linda's shouting was Bob. Bob, always calm, had never raised his voice or yelled at anyone before. But this time, he seemed unable to hold it back anymore, pulling Linda away from me and leading her off our property. "How long do you plan on causing trouble for me and my parents? You're in your 50s. Aren't you ashamed of being so selfish towards your in-laws?" At Bob's justified anger, Linda's face turned an even deeper shade of red. She seemed lost for words, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. "Linda, there's no place for you here. After all, you're no longer part of our family." "Huh? What do you mean?" As I explained in a scolding tone, Linda finally let out a bewildered cry. "I'll explain," said Bob, looking at Linda with a severity I had never seen in him before. "I know you've been cheating. I've hired a detective and collected evidence since your nightlife became excessive. I'm planning to divorce you. So, you're no longer part of our family." Bob spoke calmly, but I could only imagine how much pain he had been through to come to this decision. Linda had kept cheating on Bob, thinking he would not confront her, and the evidence collected was compelling. Bob had started contemplating divorce relatively early in their marriage. However, given Linda's character, he had assumed she would not agree easily. So he had gathered enough evidence to make her unable to deny it, and meticulously prepared to ensure the divorce would go through. Upon hearing all this, Linda was petrified, her mouth agape. "I've told your parents about this too. My parents planned to tear down the house you used to live in. There's no place for you here anymore." "What am I supposed to do when you drop something like that on me all of a sudden?" she exclaimed. "As an adult, you should think for yourself. Anyway, make sure you never come near our house again. Although I presume you won't have any time to spare," was the reply. Linda, who was coldly disowned by our family, remained immobile, slumped on the porch. Bob forcibly sent her away because leaving her here would cause trouble, but I didn't feel the slightest bit sorry for her. After moving to an apartment closer to his workplace, Bob initiated a divorce through a lawyer. Because of the solid proof of infidelity, there was no way Linda could escape. My husband and I proceeded to arrange for the demolition of our original family home. It seemed that Linda had plans to move into the original family home, but the demolition had begun and she was now without a place to live. We've already cut ties with Linda, and she's about to divorce Bob and become a total stranger again. Yet, her audacity to try to stick around in our house is unbelievable. She probably didn't care if others were inconvenienced as long as she benefited. However, even her own parents wouldn't forgive her for such behavior. She had tearfully turned to her parents for help, but they already knew the situation from Bob and turned her away, telling her not to rely on them only in times of trouble. Later, we received an apology directly from Linda's parents. From their worn-out expressions, we could tell they had been having trouble with her for a long time. With nowhere to turn and no savings to hire a lawyer, Linda had no choice but to accept the divorce. Bob, finally divorced, looked visibly relieved, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. "Linda's not working, so she's likely to have a tough time from here on out. I am so glad that I managed to divorce her." After his divorce from Linda, he no longer needed to worry about living expenses or savings and was able to focus even more on his work. My husband and I were not informed at the time, but apparently Linda was dipping into the savings account. Her extravagant spending was a concern that he might bankrupt himself. Now it seems he's living quite freely, which, as parents, is a relief. Just when we thought we could live peacefully, something happened. Linda visited our new house. When we looked at the window, we were surprised to see Linda there. She had aged significantly since the time she was married to Bob. Her hair was a mess, her skin lacked elasticity, and her clothes were shabby. Even though she should have gotten some shared property during the divorce, she might be struggling with life so much that it's still not enough. When we opened the door, there was Linda, repeatedly apologizing. Whether she was sincerely apologizing or not, either way, not a shred of sympathy was aroused in us. "What do you want?" "I am so sorry for everything. I have lost my home. My parents have disowned me, and I have nowhere to go. Please let me live here." After all she had done, did she really think we would let her into our house if she begged enough? If so, her thinking is way too superficial. Do you realize what you're asking, after all you've done? You didn't contribute to the household chores while living with us, and you spent my son's money. There is no benefit for us if you live here. We are not a family anymore, you know? I know. It was my fault. So please let me live here. Linda's apology lacked a sense of guilt. She didn't understand why she had been kicked out of the house and served with divorce papers. Rather, she seemed to be under the impression that if she apologized persistently enough, we would give in. Enough. You made both us and our son suffer for a long time, always asking for money, without any consideration, always selfish. Why would we want to let a person like that into our home? Please go back. As we coldly responded, as expected, Linda glared at us with anger-filled eyes. It was clear at a glance that she had not reflected on her actions. Just because I'm begging, you should at least let me stay. You're so stingy, it's terrible. Then why don't you go and ask at some other people's houses? If they're kind, they might let a suspicious woman like you stay. Linda grimaced in frustration, but suddenly, her face turned pale. It was dark and hard to see, but upon closer look, there was a stray cat rubbing against Linda's feet. When Linda started to scream and flap her legs, the stray cat ran away. But when a meow sounded from inside the house, she immediately tensed up. "Do you have a cat?" "Yes, we just started keeping one recently. We've always wanted to adopt a rescue cat." At my response, Linda's cheeks twitched. "I can't believe it! You're keeping a cat!" "Oh, aren't they cute? Why don't you take a look before you go?" "I don't need to." After yelling, Linda bolted off at incredible speed. The truth is, we did start keeping a cat, and we had discussed adopting a rescue cat with my husband long before. The cat that became attached to us is so cute, it makes us completely smitten. We only found out recently that Linda is severely allergic to cats. We happened to learn this while speaking with Bob, so it's not that we got a cat to drive Linda away, but in the end, it did help us fend her off, so we owe the cat our thanks. Since then, Linda has not visited our home. After that, Linda seemed to have barged into Bob's apartment while searching for a place to live. But she was ruthlessly called out by the police and was swiftly taken away, so she was unable to enter his apartment. Since then, we haven't seen Linda. But we heard through the grapevine that she was seen walking around a town in a distant place. Linda had no choice but to start working for her future life, and it seems she is now living out of state. However, for Linda, who has lived off men and hardly worked before, even a part-time job seems to be tough. Due to unfamiliar tasks and her overly selfish personality, it seems she can't keep a job for long and often gets fired. The hard-earned money she finally makes disappears in living expenses, and it seems she is now living day to day while working at a factory that comes with a dormitory. She has always done as she pleased, so it's only fair she goes through such hardships. I think it's good for her to experience firsthand how hard-earned money can easily disappear. Bob has always been troubled by Linda's extravagant spending. Furthermore, it seems that Linda has been officially disowned by her parents. Her parents, who have been put out by her extravagant spending and inflexible selfishness since long ago, have decided to cut ties with their daughter. I don't think Linda's parents are wrong in their decision. There's no rule that says all is forgiven just because they are family. My husband and I are living happily in our new home with our new family member, the cat. The time we spend playing with the cat while feeling smitten is so enjoyable and peaceful, it's irreplaceable. Of course, we also meet Bob occasionally, and going out for meals or hearing about his recent events is also a pleasure. Ideally, I wanted Bob to grasp this happiness too, but he might have new encounters ahead. When that time comes, I hope he lives with a partner who respects and cares for each other. I also want to cherish these happy times with my husband. One afternoon, I received a call from an unusual person. It was Yvonne, my former best friend who had stolen Ken from me 10 years ago. Reluctantly, I decided to answer the phone. Then, without much of a greeting, Yvonne blurted out something astonishing. I had twins. I'm expecting a baby shower gift of $36,000 from you. How dare she, after stealing my happiness, ask for such a thing? Dark emotions surfaced, but thanks to Andrew, who was looking at me worriedly, I came back to my senses. That's right. I have Andrew now. Yvonne, awaiting my response without saying anything, urged me to reply. I answered her in a cheerful voice. Sure, I'll go with my husband, the bank president. What? I could hear Yvonne's bewildered voice. I continued talking to her. I've remarried. Why didn't you tell me? Obviously. I didn't want you to interfere again. We're best friends, aren't we? Yvonne screamed about how heartless that was, but I just smiled sweetly. And then I slowly replied to her words. You were the one who betrayed me first. Yvonne was at a loss for words. I unilaterally hang up the phone and tell Andrew by my side what happened. Then, we decided to carry out a revenge plan. My name is Shelley Stone. I'm a 45-year-old housewife. I'm living a happy married life with my husband and 2 kids. My husband, Andrew, and I are in a second marriage. Andrew was a single father with 2 children at the time. Meeting Andrew, I wanted to be by his side and support him. That's why I decided to marry him. Andrew is very kind and family-oriented. Despite being busy with work, he helps with household chores and parenting. I loved him for all these reasons. Conversely, I still think my first marriage was a failure. I met my ex-husband, Ken, through the internet. We happened to match when I was around 30, and we got married because we were compatible. After getting married, I realized that Ken and I had completely different interests and values. But it was too late. Even so, both Ken and I tried to compromise at the beginning. The dark clouds over our marriage began a year after we got married. It started when my best friend visited our new home. This visit would lead me to the depths of despair. Hey, Shelley, can I come over? Yvonne! That was my best friend, Yvonne, contacting me. She couldn't attend the wedding due to scheduling conflicts, so she wanted to visit our house on a convenient day to celebrate. Since it's a special occasion, is it okay if I come over when your husband is there? I want to greet him. I'd love that, please do. Yvonne has been my best friend since high school. She was the first one to talk to me when I enrolled. Despite everything, she's still my beloved best friend. I gladly accepted Yvonne's request. Little did I know that this would lead to such an incident. The following week, Yvonne visited my new home with plenty of gifts. Nice to meet you. I'm Yvonne, Shelley's best friend. Nice to meet you. My wife always speaks highly of you. Yvonne smiled warmly and greeted Ken. Then, following Ken's lead, she entered the living room. I walked behind them and headed straight to the kitchen. I'd like some tea. Okay, then me too. Ken, usually a coffee-only guy, wanting tea? I sighed as I looked from the kitchen to the living room. Got any tea? While asking me, Ken was completely fixated on Yvonne, not even looking my way. Yvonne has always been beautiful, and even more so now, so I understand the fascination. But stretching his nose out like that when he has a wife? I thought so but still responded. No, we don't have any tea since we never drink it. Yvonne, couldn't you drink coffee? I can, but... Yvonne glanced at Ken after saying that. I like Yvonne, but honestly, I don't like that gesture of hers. Because whenever Yvonne does that, most men end up wrapped around her finger. You've come all this way. Go buy some for her. As expected, I sighed at his words. Yvonne, with a somewhat troubled look, wouldn't say coffee is fine. Reluctantly, I went to buy tea. After purchasing it at the nearest supermarket, I was walking back home. Then my phone rang. It was Ken. Sorry, but could you also pick up some cake on your way back? Well, wait a minute. Ken hung up without waiting for my reply. No matter how many times I called back, Ken wouldn't answer. He must be busy chatting away. I had no choice but to stop by a cake shop before heading home. I'm home. Oh, welcome back. As I entered the living room, I noticed the window was open. Both of them were lightly dressed, perhaps it was still too warm inside. They could have just turned off the heating. That's what I thought as I spoke up. Was it hot? Yeah, it was kinda hot. You should have turned off the heating. Yeah, we should have, would have been better. Ken seemed somewhat flustered. There was nothing unusual in the living room, and Yvonne was smiling at me cheerfully. Despite feeling uneasy, I pretended not to notice and laid out the cake. Here you go. Shelley, thank you. Yvonne thanked me cheerfully and picked a slice of cake. Then she sat down next to Ken to eat. Watching them made me feel uneasy. But Yvonne has always been a person who's comfortable being close to others, so I tried not to think too much about it, assuming it was pointless to say anything. Hey, Shelley, Ken is really wonderful, isn't he? Well, I guess. I responded bashfully to Yvonne's words. Then Yvonne smiled beautifully and continued talking while placing her hand on Ken's knee. Absolutely. He's so handsome, and above all, he's a banker, right? That's wonderful. Thank you. You're wonderful too, Yvonne. My goodness, that's so nice to hear. Ken, a banker, had recently been promoted. When Yvonne praised him for it, Ken smiled very happily. Although there were supposed to be 3 of us, it suddenly felt like they were in a world of their own. Feeling somewhat uncomfortable, I silently ate my cake and moved to the kitchen. Ken, can I come over again? Of course, please do. Right, Shelley? Finally called by my name, I looked up. Only then did I notice Yvonne leaning on Ken. Sure, but isn't that a bit close? Come on, Shelley, are you jealous? If you're too clingy, Ken may not like that. It's not about that. As I responded more sharply to Yvonne's teasing, Ken frowned. Shelley, that's rude to Yvonne, who came all the way here. Apologize. Excuse me. Apologize. Ken had never raised his voice before. So, I was shocked and my eyes widened. It's okay, Ken. I'm not mad. Right, Shelley? We're best friends after all. Sorry. I apologized reluctantly, and Yvonne looked very pleased. Next to her, Ken was smiling kindly at Yvonne. Watching this made me feel terrible. Yvonne stayed for dinner and was glued to Ken the whole time. And then she hugged Ken before leaving. Yvonne is really beautiful, isn't she? Did you enjoy flirting with my best friend? What, are you jealous? No. After Yvonne left and I confronted him with a stern look, Ken suddenly became sullen. What, it's not jealousy but envy. It's not good to be envious just because Yvonne is beautiful. That's not it. Give me a break. I'm going to bed. You can clean up. With that, Ken went straight to the bedroom. Left alone, I cleaned up while crying. And from that day on, Ken's behavior became noticeably strange. I don't need dinner tonight either. Again, today? Got a problem with that? It's not that, but Ken started dining out about half the week. He said he was busy with work, but he seemed too cheerful for it to be just work. I had a bad feeling but tried not to think about it. Make sure you iron my shirts properly. Don't embarrass me. Okay. Since Yvonne's visit, Ken began to treat me with disdain. It was very sad and painful. I once asked Ken why he was acting this way. However, Ken just glared at me and completely ignored me. Don't worry about that and just get on with the housework. Ken said that without offering any help. I sadly watched Ken leave for his outings on nights he didn't need dinner. After a month of living this way, Yvonne suddenly showed up one day. "Shelley, I have something I need to talk to you about." "Yvonne! I told you to wait." "But, I just really..." Hearing their conversation at the entrance, I realized my bad feeling had become reality. "Since when?" Ken, looking a bit uncomfortable, muttered a response. "Since the day Yvonne visited." Hearing that, everything went dark before my eyes. Then Yvonne spoke to me. "I thought it was wrong. After all, he's your husband. But I've fallen in love with Ken." Yvonne, with tears in her eyes, said this, and Ken moved closer to comfort her. Honestly, I had a feeling it would come to this from the first time I saw Ken and Yvonne together. I was just looking away. "Are you going to divorce me?" "I'm sorry, but I've fallen in love with Yvonne. I'll pay the alimony, so please don't ask her for anything." Ken's words hit me like a blunt instrument, bringing a surge of anger. "Why do you get to decide that?" "I'll demand alimony from both of you." "All right. I'll cover Yvonne's part too." "Please do as you wish." Unable to bear the sight of the man I loved protecting his affair partner, I yelled, and Yvonne flinched. Ken hugged her as if to protect her. I felt like I was losing my mind. Soon after, I divorced Ken and moved away with the alimony from both of them. I heard through the grapevine that they got married quickly, and while I wallowed in sadness, I also started a new life. Luckily, I found a job quickly. As I got accustomed to the work, I also found a new boyfriend, and gradually, I stopped thinking about Ken and Yvonne. My new boyfriend, Andrew, is a very kind man. Andrew is divorced with 2 children. Despite being busy with work, he's fully committed to parenting, and I completely fell for him. Andrew loves me wholeheartedly. He introduced me to his children early on, and they also got along well with me. After dating for about 3 years, we got married. Surrounded by blessings from everyone around us, I quit my job to support him as a full-time housewife. I was living very happily, without a thought of Ken and Yvonne, enjoying a smooth-sailing marriage. However, trouble always comes when you least expect it. One afternoon, I received a call from an unusual person. It was Yvonne, my former best friend who had stolen Ken from me 10 years ago. Reluctantly, I decided to answer the phone. Then, without much of a greeting, Yvonne blurted out something astonishing. "I had twins. I'm expecting a baby shower gift of $36,000 from you." How dare she, after stealing my happiness, ask for such a thing? Dark emotions surfaced, but thanks to Andrew, who was looking at me worriedly, I came back to my senses. That's right. I have Andrew now. Yvonne, awaiting my response without saying anything, urged me to reply. I answered her in a cheerful voice. "Sure, I'll go with my husband, the bank president." "What?" I could hear Yvonne's bewildered voice. I continued talking to her. "I've remarried. Why didn't you tell me?" "Obviously. I didn't want you to interfere again. We're best friends, aren't we?" Yvonne screamed about how heartless that was, but I just smiled sweetly. And then I slowly replied to her words. "You were the one who betrayed me first." Yvonne was at a loss for words. I hung up the phone unilaterally and explained the situation to Andrew beside me. Then, we decided to carry out a revenge plan. After discussing with Andrew, we finalized the plan. What I had originally planned at the beginning of the divorce, I had forgotten because I was having so much fun dating Andrew. But if they're going to bring it up again, that's a different story. Go all out, that's what I say. "Yeah, thanks." I thanked him and nodded. Then, I spent the next week repeatedly simulating my reunion with Yvonne. On the day we had agreed upon, I headed to the address Yvonne had given me and rang the doorbell. "Welcome." "Oh, your husband?" "Yes, that's right. I didn't know you had remarried." "You could have told me." "How can you say that?" "You did that to me." Yvonne's face clouded over for a moment at my words, but she still managed to keep a smile and ushered us inside. The interior, larger than the house Ken and I had lived in, was scattered with branded clothes and bags here and there. All women's items, so they must be Yvonne's. Still into designers' brands, I see. Oh, yeah. But actually, I prefer simpler things. Yvonne, for some reason, answered Andrew instead of me. Come to think of it, it was the same with Ken. I felt like screaming right there and then. But Andrew stopped me. Yvonne, the question was directed at Shelley. I don't particularly have anything I want to ask. Oh, is that so? Yvonne looked deflated, her momentum broken. Just seeing that made me feel a bit gleeful. Thank you. You're welcome. Andrew said with a smile, and I could trust him as my greatest ally. And as we entered the living room, there was Ken, lounging comfortably, who looked up and was surprised to see me. Shelley. Why are you here? Why? Because Yvonne invited us. What? Yvonne, why did you invite them? Ken looked confused. And then, seeing who was behind me, his surprise grew. The president! Why are you with Shelley? I remarried. He's my husband. What? You remarried? Ken kept comparing me and Andrew, his behavior rudely incredulous. Andrew's brow furrowed at Ken's impertinent attitude. Do you have a problem with my wife? No, not at all. Ken straightened up, his response pitiful. Yvonne, perhaps thinking the same, sighed dramatically. But that wasn't the end of it with Yvonne. Nice to meet you, Shelley's husband. I'm Yvonne, Shelley's best friend. Yvonne leaned towards Andrew as she said this, but Andrew dodged. Still, Yvonne persisted. You're handsome. What's your name? I have no intention of telling you. Oh, come on, don't be cold. Yvonne reached out and touched his arm. That's when he knocked her hand away. Ouch. Yvonne! President, what are you doing to my wife? Ken glared at Andrew, reacting to Yvonne's minor cry of pain. Then Andrew, clearly exasperated, turned to Ken. Your wife was the one who suddenly touched me. And you don't feel sorry for Yvonne? I don't think so. Rather, I think she should reflect on the lightness of being married and then trying to touch another man so easily. Yvonne's face turned bright red at Andrew's words. Clearly offended, she glared back at him. Facing Yvonne, I finally spoke up. So, Yvonne, trying to steal someone else's man again, huh? What? Thought I wouldn't notice? I pulled out photos from my bag and scattered them. They showed many men. Yvonne turned pale at the sight. What's this? These are photos of all your past boyfriends. Well, Yvonne is beautiful, after all. Sure, but that doesn't give her the right to keep stealing other people's lovers. Ken too turned pale, recognizing the pattern, but then he quickly grabbed a photo. Hey, is this a recent photo? Yes, that was just taken the day before yesterday. Hearing this, Ken glared at Yvonne and thrust the photo at her. It showed Yvonne walking arm in arm with a young man. Why do you have this? Hey, didn't you say you were staying at your mom's because she was sick the day before yesterday? Ken raised his voice. Yvonne tried to make excuses, but Ken wasn't having any of it. We're getting divorced. I'm done. Why does it have to come to this? As they started to argue, I intervened. The conversation wasn't over yet. I showed them another photo. This time, Ken went white as a ghost. What's this? This shows you, doesn't it? Andrew said, causing Ken to shake his head in panic, but the photo clearly showed Ken's face. Faced with undeniable evidence, Ken slumped down. Please, anything but losing my job. I can't just overlook someone who embezzled funds. That's impossible. Indeed, Ken had been embezzling money from the bank. This was discovered soon after we began preparing our plan. It was when Andrew hired a detective. There had been frequent discrepancies in Ken's department's finances, and Andrew had his suspicions about Ken, who was known for his lavish lifestyle. As a banker, not only did you hurt and abandon my wife, but you also damaged the bank. That's a disqualification.
I'm sorry. I needed the money. I'll pay it back.
If it were that easy, we wouldn't need the police. At Andrew's words, Ken collapsed to his knees in despair. Yvonne, looking down at Ken, regarded him as if he were trash. Talking about a salary increase recently, that was a lie?
It's because you keep buying all those high-end stuff. It's your fault for not earning a proper salary as a banker, isn't it? What a loser. How dare you?
Ken glared at Yvonne. But Yvonne, thinking she was in the superior position, wasn't fazed at all. To her, I handed a document. Not something someone in debt should be saying, right? How do you have that? If you borrowed from a legit place, the interest wouldn't have ballooned like this. Tough times ahead, huh? After saying that to Yvonne, I made a phone call. Then, after finishing the call, I turned to speak to Yvonne. Yvonne was always popular, wasn't she? And what about it? But did you know, actually no one liked you? What? Yvonne looked at me with a puzzled expression. In truth, Yvonne was really disliked during our school days. Sure, she was popular with the boys because of her pretty looks. However, her bad attitude and habit of stealing other people's boyfriends made her resented by the girls. As I explained this, Yvonne, seemingly unaware, twitched her mouth. People said you were popular or unapproachable, but really, you were just disliked and kept at arm's length.
That's a lie!
To prove it, nobody invited you to their weddings, did they? Yvonne looked taken aback at my words. I had thought of her as my best friend and never expected her to make a move on my partner, so I had invited her to my wedding. She hadn't been able to attend, but if she had, I might have been criticized by other friends. I shuddered at the thought, now in hindsight. But Yvonne seemed too preoccupied to care about how I felt. That's a lie. I was popular, beautiful, unapproachable. Yvonne mumbled to herself, honestly creepy. After a moment, she suddenly looked up at Andrew and tried to lean on him. Andrew, I'm beautiful, right? Andrew silently dodged her. Angered by his reaction, Yvonne reached out and grabbed him.
Why are you avoiding me?
Because it was repulsive. Repulsive. Yes, like a witch. Yvonne, completely losing her composure, was frantic. Watching this, I thought Andrew's words were quite apartment. Andrew continued, unflinchingly. My wife is more beautiful than you, so I would never be swayed by you.
Me, less beautiful than Shelley? Impossible.
No, it's a fact. In terms of the beauty of the heart and appearance, my wife is the best. Andrew's words brought tears to my eyes. However, Yvonne was outraged at being told I was more beautiful. Shelley is more beautiful than me. Are you blind? Then, it's your mind that's messed up.
What?
Andrew's taunts kept coming, and Yvonne snapped back. Amidst this back and forth, the doorbell rang. Seeing the visitor, Yvonne turned pale. No. No, this can't be happening. Good luck paying back your debt.
No!
As Yvonne screamed, the door opened, and some menacing-looking people entered. They flanked Yvonne and took her away, somewhat forcibly. Ken watched, trembling, making no move to save his beloved wife. Seeing Ken's inaction, I thought to myself that divorcing him was truly the right decision. It hurt, and it was hard, but thank you for being swayed by Yvonne. Such indecent thoughts seemed to show on my face. Ken glared at me. What's so funny? Nothing. Just realizing that this is what they mean by you reap what you sow. If it weren't for you, I could have been happy. No way. You two are both in a debt hell. Unable to argue with my words, Ken grinded his teeth in frustration. To such a Ken, I smiled and handed him a thick envelope. What's this? It's the baby shower gift. The $36,000 Yvonne asked for. Aren't you going to show me the kids? The kids are at my parents' house today. Wait, $36,000? Yes, it's like saying pay back the alimony, isn't it? Indeed, the amount of $36,000 was the alimony Ken and his group had paid me at the time. Yvonne, burdened by debt, probably intended to use it to pay off her debts. The reason she left the children at Ken's parents' house was because Yvonne never intended to show the children to us in the first place. I then dropped another bombshell. Well, it would be good if those kids were really yours. What do you mean? Ken's face turned pale as he grasped the meaning of my words. If Yvonne's affair before getting pregnant was with the man in the photos, it's highly likely he could be the father. Ken seemed to realize this.
But Yvonne said they look like me.
Well, she wouldn't want to get caught, would she?
All your words could be lies too.
What? I don't have time to lie, and I never wanted anything to do with Yvonne if she hadn't called me. As I cut down Ken's words each time, his momentum gradually faded. I pressed further. This is a test result from a while back. Test result. Yes, I had it reissued from the hospital. The document I produced was from a gynecological exam Ken had undergone while we were married. It contained certain words. Natural pregnancy is difficult. Yes. That's why when I heard about the twins, I remembered this. Ken was shocked as he looked at the test result. I had intended to discuss the results with him, but Yvonne visited our home the day before I could tell him. Are those kids not mine? With high chance, not. Why bring this up now? Is this revenge? Ken said something so obvious, I just smiled back at him. Then Andrew spoke up. You'll be on house arrest from tomorrow. We'll send a notice. Expect to be dismissed.
Wait, please! Anything but dismissal.
Ken was still saying such things even now. Andrew returned Ken's plea with a cold look. And then made a phone call. Hearing the name of the person Andrew called, Ken went pale. Calling the manager. I've told them to thoroughly investigate your case. Ken fell to his knees, pale as a ghost. And muttered quietly. It's all over for me. Yes, your career as a banker is over. Not just as a banker, but with all the debt remaining, his life might be over too. I thought so, but Ken probably knew that best. Lacking the energy to glare at me anymore, Ken started apologizing to Andrew on the ground. I am so sorry, please don't fire me. I already told you that's inevitable. Rejected sharply by Andrew, Ken then turned to beg me. So he still wanted to be a banker that badly. I was somewhat impressed in a way. While bowing to me, Ken dared to ask. Shelley, I'm truly sorry. Can you ever forgive me? Is that because you think if I forgive you, you won't be fired? That's part of it. I'm astonished. Affirming his intent, I sighed. And then I made it clear. Even if I forgive him, it doesn't erase the fact that you embezzled money, and in the first place, my husband doesn't mix his public and private life. So, that's it. Did Ken think he was hanging by a spider's thread? He wore an expression of despair. Leaving a speechless Ken behind, Andrew and I left the scene. Afterward, I heard that Yvonne sent a divorce petition. Ken signed it, relinquishing custody as well. It turned out the twins Yvonne had were indeed from her affair, becoming the talk of the bank. I received an apology from my former in-laws. Though we were estranged during my marriage, it seems they were only watching from a distance. Now, I hear Ken has become a shell of himself, confined to his room at his parents' house. As Andrew declared, Ken was fired from the bank. Burdened with debt and required to repay the embezzled amount, his life has become exceedingly difficult. I heard he's juggling jobs day and night, subsisting on sprouts to stave off hunger. He once came to our house in shabby clothes, but security stopped him before he could even reach the door. I might seem callous for not pitying Ken's downfall from grace. But upon reflection, it's probably what he deserved. Yvonne's parents, who I knew, were shocked when I informed them of the truth. Apparently, They were unaware of how Yvonne met Ken and that he was my ex-husband. They apologized so much I felt sorry for them. They offered a nuisance fee, but since it wasn't their fault, I declined. Yvonne was taken away by debt collectors, and her whereabouts are unknown. A letter from near the sea arrived once, so she might be alive somewhere. The twins were being raised by Yvonne's elderly parents, who couldn't manage and recently placed them in a facility. It might be sad, but growing up away from Yvonne might be for the best. Realizing I've come to dislike Yvonne this much was a revelation to me. Andrew is diligently performing his duties as a bank president, though he's been coming home late recently. He always keeps in touch, so I have no worries about infidelity. Meeting such a gentleman has made me feel fortunate, and the painful divorce seems worth it if it led me to marry him. He mentioned hiring a new secretary recently and wants to host a home party, preparing barbecue equipment with enthusiasm. Watching him makes me feel genuinely happy. Lately, I've gotten into going on trips with the kids, just the three of us. Mostly, it's day trips close to home, but they're incredibly refreshing and fun. Andrew wants to join us, but he's so busy right now he can't find the time, so we're making the most of our time together, just the three of us. The older child is already in middle school but still calls me mom and adores me. The younger one hugs me and says I love you, making every day extremely happy. And now, there's a new life growing inside me. Being 45 and facing a high-risk pregnancy since it's my first, I still want to carefully raise this precious life we've been blessed with. The kids are looking forward to having a much younger sibling, so we plan to decide on the baby's name together as a family of 4 soon.
If it's a girl, I'm not letting her marry off.
Oh, you're getting ahead of yourself. We've decided not to determine the baby's gender until birth, accepting Andrew's suggestion, so we don't yet know if it will be a boy or a girl. Thanks to that, we spend every day talking about what it will be like if it's a boy, if it's a girl, imagining our future. There have been hard days, but the happiness I feel now overwrites them, and I am truly happy. I feel like the future looks bright. With these thoughts, I gently stroked my belly.